Many of you already know me. I'm Owen Hewlett. I'm the Chief Technical Officer here at Gold Standard. My role is to lead on all new standards developments, new standards and updates, new tool development and certification of projects. I'm joined by colleagues Richard Eiliff from my team, who has led on the development of our new renewable energy labelling scheme, and Bernardo Lazo, who's our Director for Partnerships and Business Development, who's helping to roll that out as well. And you'll hear from those guys later in the presentation. So what we're talking about today is the Renewable Energy Eligibility and Labelling Scheme, which in short means discussion on a consultation that we're currently running on the eligibility for renewable energy projects to be issued with gold standard carbon credits and the alternative to that in the labelling scheme. In terms of the running order today, I want to take you through briefly the proposed changes and the rationale behind those changes, and then we'll stop for some Q&A. So I'll focus mainly on the new eligibility proposals, and then I'll stop for some Q&A on that. If you have questions, there's really two ways to ask that. You can either put your question in the questions box, which you can see on your dashboard, hopefully. So if you look in your control panel there on the right of your screen, then there's a question section. You can easily answer put your questions in there, and I'll read those out and respond to them. You can also put your hand up, which is a little hand icon. If you do that, please make sure you've got a decent internet connection, because it can be quite difficult to hear otherwise. So if in doubt, I would put your question in the question box. So if you can save questions till the end of my section, that will be great, but feel free to put them in the question box in the meantime. And then when we've done that, we'll move on to Bernardo, who will give us a presentation on the gold standard renewable energy labelling scheme that we now operate, which is a new product that we launched last year and is now starting to pick up some traction. We want to present that today because, as some of you will have already picked up from the consultation, we are going to look to restrict the eligibility of renewable energy projects in some parts of the world for carbon crediting. But we want to do that with an alternative offering on board, and hence the need to present on that today. So if you're already well aware of renewable energy labels, then feel free to drop out at that point. But I think it's a useful thing to listen into, particularly if you are looking at the alternatives for your project portfolio going forward. And there'll be a chance for some questions on that at the end. So I'd imagine this webinar will last something around 40-45 minutes, but we've got an hour, so we can deal with questions. Inevitably, if you think of questions after the webinar, I always do that, realize what I wanted to ask about 10 minutes after it finished. It's totally fine to email us with any questions or thoughts. The consultation is open till the 12th of September, and you can email any of us, and I'll give the details shortly. So right into it then, the overview of the proposed changes. The consultation is open on the consultation and grievances section of our website until mid-September, as I say. On there, you'll find a short paper that proposes some new eligibility criteria specifically for grid-connected renewable energy projects. So this is the grid-connected part is important there. And basically what it does is change the eligibility for new projects going forward for the issuance of carbon credits. And so there's a number of criteria. The first is that we propose to stop issuing carbon credits for renewable energy projects in upper middle or higher income countries as defined by the World Bank. And there's a link in the slide there, but it's an easy thing to Google to find out which countries are included in that. And if that test is passed, i.e. that your project is not in a country that's upper middle or higher income, then we'll restrict it to installed capacity of 3.5%. Below 3.5% is actually a typo there. It should be below 3.5%. So we'll allow crediting where the installed capacity of the technology you propose is below 3.5%. So apologies for the typo. So it's a twin test. I'll come on to the rationale for that in a second. There is a third way. So any projects located in least developed countries or small island developing states are exempt from this eligibility test. I appreciate that's not necessarily that comforting, as there's not that many of those that are grid connected but there are a couple, so that might be relevant to some of your projects. And then just really importantly, I want to reassure everybody on one point, which I know will come up. This change will apply to new projects only. There's no intention to apply it retroactively. So your existing carbon credit projects that are renewable energy sector are unaffected by this. So if you're in the middle of a crediting period or you're registered, this won't be applied retroactively, and it won't be applied at crediting renewal. So existing projects are unaffected. This is only for new projects. We haven't set a date for when these new rules would come into force. We'll do that shortly, but we would imagine towards the end of this year, Q4 this year. And as with all of our rules, we will put in place a grace period to allow for projects that are, for example, in validation or in preliminary review, to continue on the path that they have done, having expended the cost towards that. So we haven't set those timings yet, but be reassured that those timings will make sure that nobody has kind of expended cash towards the issuance of carbon credits and then has that pulled out from them, from underneath them. So just to reiterate, not applicable to existing projects, and for new projects will come into effect later this year in Q4, and there'll be a grace period for projects that are already submitted to Gold Standard but haven't yet issued. Just briefly then, a couple of other quick points to note. Renewable energy projects will still be eligible for two things other than carbon credits. So if you're in one of those non-eligible places, either you're a higher upper middle or higher income country, or the technology is above 3.5% installed capacity, you do still have gold standard pathways to be eligible for new projects. GS for the global goals allows for project-only certification. So you could just certify as a project and don't have to issue anything. And there's no need, this eligibility rule doesn't apply for that. But probably more enticingly, since that version is really for kind of corporate reporting, that kind of thing, a more kind of appealing option, I suspect, will be the gold standard renewable energy labels. And that's something Bernardo will present later in this call. So to be clear, these new eligibility restrictions only apply to the issuance of carbon credits. I just want to quickly talk about the rationale for why we're proposing these changes, and I group those into three key areas. So the first is really about where should gold standard carbon finance be directed. So it would be wrong to say that additionality wasn't in our minds when we were thinking about this requirement, but it would also be wrong to think of this as a kind of new additionality test. It's kind of earlier than that. It's more of a philosophical approach that we feel, based on research and input from other stakeholders, that renewable energy, particularly in upper middle and higher income countries, doesn't require carbon finance and should by now be sustainable. And for other countries apart from LDCs, if the installed capacity is above 3.5%, then that generally indicates a sustainable market also. And on that basis, although there is some nuance and some grey area in some projects, may well still be able to prove additionality. On the whole, we feel that carbon credit finance isn't appropriate to direct to those projects and is better directed to project types that are driving more transformational change. So in a way, I suppose it represents kind of good news, I guess. It represents a success of the markets in a way that renewable energy is sustainable enough that it doesn't require this kind of transformational gap finance anymore. So that's the broad rationale. In terms of some of those inputs, so we've discussed extensively with our civil society partners, for example, at WWF, at WRI, at Carbon Market Watch, etc. And we've taken views from research. So I'm sure many of you will be aware of the paper released by the European Commission on how clean is the CDM, which talks about the risks around additionality for some of the more common technology types in renewable energy. So those things were on our mind when we began to develop these new eligibility requirements. The second rationale really is that Gold Standard is looking to build bridges and align with the greenhouse gas protocol. So if you're aware of our Scope 3 guidance that's also out to consultation, you'll note that we are working with WRI and the Science Based Targets Initiative to see how projects can align with greenhouse gas protocol accounting. The greenhouse gas protocol treats renewable energy slightly differently. So it's important to note that the GHG protocol doesn't allow for offsetting. It allows you to report on offsetting, but doesn't allow you to offset your inventory as a corporate or a company reporting to them. But what it does do is it recognizes renewable energy certificates for Scope 2. And so in aligning with the GHG protocol, we really want to direct the market towards that because that's a more consistent, standardized way of working, and it fits better with the science-based targets approach. So there's real opportunity there, I think, to recognize the role of RECs in greenhouse gas protocol accounting and work towards greater civil society alignment. And then lastly, just a flag, we aren't the only standard looking at this. If you have projects in your portfolio that are with VCS, for example, you will note that they also have out to consultation right now a similar set of proposals to restrict the issuance of carbon credits for renewable energy. Theirs is slightly different to ours. They allow for LDCs, but they don't have the requirement around the 3.5% installed capacity. So the rationale for us including with that was that we still feel like there's a series of countries between LDC and upper middle income that diversification is still worth supporting. That's why we wanted to allow that, whereas VCS are saying that LDCs only are eligible, I think, although I don't have it in front of me. We wanted to still support diversification in developing countries, and hence that's why that second test is in there. But really just a flag, we're not alone. I would expect other standards to follow suit shortly. I don't know where the CDM is at with that, but given how clean is the CDM report, it must be on their minds to look at as well, I would have thought. So expect to see more from them, I suspect, in due course. So we didn't want gold standard to be left behind on the one hand. We also didn't want to rush out our requirements, particularly because we wanted our renewable energy label scheme to be available as an alternative to users. So that's why we've gone slightly behind actually VCS, although we have discussed with our colleagues and peers at the other standards to try and bring this forward to market at roughly similar times. But we delayed slightly so that we could get our renewable energy label thoughts clearer. So that's pretty much the summary of the consultation. We are interested to hear feedback on the tests, on the principle. Do you think that's the right approach? Do you think this is how gold standard should see its role in directing carbon finance? And we're happy to field any technical questions on that. If you have feedback on the consultation on the eligibility part, then that's to me, owen.hewlett@goldstandard.org. And if you have questions on renewable energy labels, which will be presented shortly, that's to Bernardo and to Richard, whose email addresses are on screen there as well. But I'll stop there. Maybe just a quick summary again. We're basically restricting the eligibility of carbon credits to LDCs in developing countries. So those in upper middle and higher income countries will be restricted. And for those non-LDC countries remaining, eligibility will be restricted to technologies that are less than 3.5% of the installed capacity. Is basically what our proposal is. And just to reiterate, because I know this will be a major concern to those with portfolios of this type of project, this doesn't affect existing projects, and there'll be a grace period for those of you with projects that are currently under development with gold standard. So I'll pause there. If you have any questions for me, please do drop them in the questions box. I'll pause for a moment while you do that. If there's no questions now, we'll dive straight on into the renewable energy labeling presentation. But feel free to ask questions on either topic at the end of that. So if you just need a second to think of any more questions on the eligibility side, that's totally fine. We'll treat them all at the end of the webinar. Okay, I'm not seeing too many questions, so hopefully that means generally we've been fairly clear on what we're trying to achieve. We do genuinely seek feedback on this, so I appreciate sometimes with standards it must look like we're telling you what we're going to do and we're going through the motions of having a stakeholder consultation. That's genuinely not the case here. We are interested to hear feedback on the principle and on the technicality of what we propose. The consultation's open till the 12th of September, so you have plenty of time to submit. So please do take advantage of that. We would be very interested to hear from you on that, even if it's just to say that you support it. That's also a useful feedback in its own way. Okay, so there is one question there which says 3.5% of what in the first slide. So that's, which I'll just quickly hop back to. So that's this test where the installed capacity is the measure basically. So if you are in a country that's so by country, if you're in an LDC, you're eligible. That's fine. If you're in upper middle class, upper middle income, or higher income, you are ineligible. For everything in between, you are eligible if the technology you're proposing is less than 3.5% of the installed capacity of the grid. And there's various resources you can find online to give you the latest picture of installed capacity. It's pretty easy and free resource to find, and we'll circulate a link to that in the final version. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions for now. If there are other questions, I'll pick them up at the end. But in the meantime, let's keep moving. And I'll pass over to Bernardo. Bernardo, let me know when you want to move on slides, and I'll click it through.
Thank you, Owen. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar and this session. I hope you found this explanation of our current consultation relevant and clarifying on its aim and what it's about. And now I will talk to you about the gold standard renewable energy label, which was developed last year in order to tap into the renewable energy certificate market and providing a quality label on projects that provide renewable energy. And this is a different market, and it's aimed to provide both existing stakeholders and project developers, as well as new project developers, an option to generate these quality labels and be able to obtain some additional revenues from some of the projects that are being developed now, either in addition or in addition to carbon credits, or simply just for commercializing these renewable energy certificates. So, Owen, if you can go to the next slide. For those of you that are not familiar with what are the renewable energy certificates, these are credits that independently certify that a given amount of energy has been generated from a renewable source. And this is mostly for businesses and organizations that buy electricity from the grid that comes from a mix of renewable and fossil fuel and nuclear power, that they cannot be sure where the exact energy it's coming from. So unless they have renewable energy production facilities on site or are directly connected with these facilities, there is no clear way of ascertain that the renewable energy, that power from the grid is coming from renewable energy. Therefore, the use of these certificates. And when businesses purchase these certificates, they have an independent assurance that the energy that they buy comes from 100% renewable, and they can make a credible public claim to support this global transition to clean energy, or simply comply with either domestic or local regulations to meet certain renewable portfolio standards. So, and most of this demand for the renewable energy certificate comes from either regulatory compliance, and it really varies from country to country or region to region, or from voluntary corporate commitments to source from renewables. And one of them is RE100, in which many of the large corporates have committed to transition to acquire or produce electricity from 100% renewables. And just to give you a flavor, these the commitments made by these companies in aggregate, they are equivalent to the annual consumption of electricity of the country of Egypt. So it's not insignificant, and that means that corporates that have presence in several countries, they will need to eventually either develop their own renewable energy projects or sign a specific power purchase agreements with renewable energy sources, or acquire renewable energy certificates to meet this commitment. So this is a relatively new but evolving market that it's growing, and not only in developed countries but also in other developing countries where, for instance, Gold Standard has certified renewable energy projects. If we go to the next slide. So in this sense, we have developed this renewable energy certificate label, and what it does, it ensures that a project is contributing to the SDG 7, in particular to target 7.2, to increase substantially the share of renewable energies in the global mix. And in addition to that, it enables to contribute to 3 SDGs and report on the contributions of these SDGs in a transparent way. Having said that, we are the Gold Standard is labeling these certificates, is not issuing and tracking the actual production of renewable energy certificates. That will be done by existing certification schemes. And if we go to the next slide, please. So the Gold Standard is at the moment labeling credits produced by IREX, international RECs, and with the aim to ensure that these projects are not only are renewable energy, but they are quality projects that have complied with stakeholder engagement, with safeguards principles for environment and social, and that they are actively contributing towards sustainable development, and with limitations on the age of these installations, so ensuring it's promoting new renewable energy. And the label is designed to offer flexibility to existing renewable energy projects or project developers that are familiar with Gold Standard, so that they can choose to issue either Gold Standard carbon credits or renewable energy labels, or a combination of both, making sure that for every megawatt hour only carbon credits are issued, or megawatt or RECs labels are issued, but not both. And this label will also help corporates to report to RE100 as well as the greenhouse gas protocol towards their claims for procurement of 100% renewable electricity. Then I'm going to talk to you about the requirements. If we move to the next slide, please. So in order to receive this renewable energy label, a project must obtain a Gold Standard certified design status, meaning that a project is registered under the Gold Standard for the global goals, and also to be certified under an eligible renewable energy product standard. At the moment, we are labeling IREX, as I mentioned. In the future, it could be either local or international renewable energy standards, but this is perhaps one of the main ones that it's operating in countries where there is not a local or national official tracking system. So IREX is filling the gap, and it's establishing relationships with host governments to define a transparent and objective and robust standard system to track these renewable and issue these renewable energy certificates. So in the same way as Gold Standard labels CERs that comply with the Gold Standard rules, in a similar way, we will label IREX that comply from projects that comply with our standard rules. And as I mentioned, this involves stakeholder engagement, safeguards, which many of you might be familiar from previous project development experience, and the contribution to 3 SDGs, of which one would be climate action, and the second one most likely also SDG 7, which is sustainable energy for all. In terms of the process to get gold standards certification, we already launched and it's published the standard requirements for this particular product. If we move to the next slide, please, I will show you in a summary process how our new project and also an existing gold standard VR project can obtain this label. So, for instance, for a new project, a project would need to be designed according to the gold standard for the global goals and applying the renewable energy label product requirements. Once this is done, or while this is being done, the project should also register with IREX and issue the IREX into a nominated account, assuming that the project is already operational and generating electricity, of course. And after that, a project must undergo a verification and performance certification for the gold standard label. And in this case, it will focus on particularly the sustainability attributes of the project and ensuring that the safeguards have been followed, as well as the stakeholder engagement. But gold standard would not focus on the actual generation of electricity, because that check has been already done by IREX and the actual certificate has been issued by IREX. So we will just label the additional attributes that relate to our standard, and we allow both new and existing projects to issue the labels retroactively, but also to allow them to be able to issue the labels for the subsequent 12 months after a performance verification takes place. This means that, for instance, if we have a verification that it's completed in January this year, a project can claim any past issuance of IREX, but also during during this year, it would be able to issue additional IREX as it goes generating these megawatt hours, without having to incur into an additional performance certification for every issuance within this 12-month period. And in addition, for those projects that are either already gold standard certified or that are developed from the beginning as to generate either BRs and RECs, it would enable them to either issue BRs for a particular monitoring period or a combination of both, assuming that there is no double counting for each megawatt hour. And just very briefly, in terms of existing gold standard VR projects, in the case that you already have a VR project and you would like to explore or offer to one of your clients that it's a project owner the option of generating RECs, there is a simplified process to do that basically requires that a project transition to the gold standard for the global goals and to the renewable energy label. This can also be done during performance certification, but at the time of performance certification, the IREX needs to be issued. A project needs to go with IREX, get its projects registered, and get the issuance of IREX. For those that are not familiar with IREX, the process for registration of a project and for issuance, it's quite straightforward. It's simple. It doesn't require a lot of reviews, so it can be done probably within a month. the registration of a project, if not less, and the issuance can take up to a few days. So that's a very, let's say, straightforward process. But in parallel or after this issuance of credits, then the gold standard performance certification needs to take place in order for us to label these IRECs. If we go to the next slide, please. On the next slide, you will see that we at the moment have a call, an open call for projects to certify under this new label. And for this call for action, we are providing assistance to early moving projects to apply this label that will help guiding them through this new process. No, providing some assistance to understand the rules, whether it's for an existing VR project or for a new one. The deadline to submit the interest is on the 15th of August of this year. So I encourage you, if you're interested or some of your clients are interested, to submit your interest and share your project details. You can find more information in the link included here on this page, and includes the guidance document that can be followed for the process for certifying using this label, as well as a simple form to submit to us with some of the project details. And in addition, you can see here some links on other resources that we have on this Renewable Energy label. I presume we were going to share the contents of this presentation shortly afterwards the webinar finishes, so you can access and review in more detail both the overall rules, the guidelines, and this particular call for action. No, in terms of queries for how IREX works and operates, you can contact them directly. Here is the email as well as the link to the website. And that's it. That's it for me now. I hope you find this this new resource interested. If you have further questions or ideas on how to participate in this new market, I'm available. Please do reach and get in touch, and we can discuss what are the opportunities. From what we see in the market, it's more interest on corporate buyers to make sure that their electricity, renewable energy electricity, it's sourced from quality projects, and we are able to provide the label for that. No?
Thanks, Bernardo. So we've got some time now to take further questions or comments. I see one, or I see two actually already in the questions box. So Bernardo, I'll read them out, but happy to answer them, or feel free for you or Richard to do it. So the first is, should projects be grid connected for labeling? And the second is, what are the eligible countries? So I don't know, Bernardo, Rich, if you want to take that, I'm happy to, otherwise, either way.
Yes, thank you, Owen. In terms of grid connection, yes, the projects need to be grid connected. And in terms of eligibility of countries, IREX has a list on the eligible countries on their website. It's a list, if I recall correctly, around 25 countries. It's continuously evolving, and the way it works is IREX establishes a relationship with the host government, identifies whether there is a gap for energy tracking systems, renewable energy tracking systems, and defines a way, or either it's a local issuer that issue the IREX, or it's IREX secretariat and themselves. No, and for some countries there are some restrictions on the project types. In some other countries, is any any renewable energy project. So the restriction doesn't come from, in this case, from gold standard, but from IREX at this point. No, but there is an overlap between gold projects certified under gold standard and the list of eligible projects from IREX.
Great, thanks, Bernardo. Then there's a couple of other questions coming through. So one on the eligibility side, which I can field. So smaller renewable energy projects do not enjoy the economies of scale that make large projects financially viable on their own. These small and mid-scale projects have significant financial gap. Why can't existing CDM additionality tests remain in place for these projects? I think this is exactly why we wanted to consider this to be a principles issue rather than an additionality issue. So in the case of upper, middle, and higher income countries, for example, is not especially now about supporting individual projects, but more about what a country should be doing to make sure that renewable energy is a sustainable industry in the country, which in 99% of those countries it now is. And if there are types of renewable energy within those countries that aren't financially viable, that's really a question now for country policy rather than carbon finance to resolve. So we're looking for carbon finance to drive transformational change, and I think the answer is in the question. If it's making small nominal changes to the grid, then that's not transformational change in a country where renewable energy is already sustainable in the main. So it's really more of a principles issue than an additionality issue. But I do see your point. I do understand where you're coming from, and that's also why something like the REX labelling scheme is still available and doesn't require additionality to be proved. The next question then is mini grids and off grids, are they allowed for labelling under IREX? Rich, Bernardo, I must admit I'm not actually sure of the answer to that myself, so I'll have to pass that one to you guys, and if we're not sure, then we can take that one away to respond later.
Yeah, Bernardo, I'm happy to take this. The question, mini grids and off grids also allowed for labelling. Is a general rule, gold standard doesn't have an issue against it, but it's a requirement that the IREX have, that projects need to be connected to the national grid. And the reason why is if a project's off grid or mini grid, then there isn't really the issue about lack of certainty about the quality of the electricity, because if you're off grid and you're using a renewable device, you don't need a certificate to sort of prove that you're using renewable energy, and similar applies in the case of mini grids. So I'm happy to move on to the next two questions as well from Nikunj. So again, relating to IREX. So first question is, for existing gold standard projects under IREX, is it compulsory to convert the project to GSVGG? The answer is yes, because it's the first version of our standard that allows renewable energy labelling. Second question from Nikunj is, who will do the gold standard verification for the issued IREX? The process, the gold standard check of IREX issuance. So that would be eligible GSVVBs. So we have a list on our website of VVBs who are qualified for this this scope and this type of project. So we can share that with an update after this webinar via email.
Great, thanks Richard, thanks Bernardo. Any other questions there that anybody wants to drop into the questions box? We'll give it a couple more minutes to see if anybody has anything else to raise, but those have been super insightful questions, so thanks very much to those that have submitted to date. We will, what we normally do with webinars is we'll circulate a recording and a schedule of the questions raised for others to read, and we'll put our answers to those as well. But we'll do that anyway as part of the consultation. So the questions will be kind of published as part of the consultation. So if you prefer to remain anonymous, that's totally fine. Please just drop us an email. Otherwise, we'll publish our responses and any changes we make accordingly. Okay, I'm not seeing further questions go down. So on that basis, thank you very much, everybody, for for joining today. I appreciate those of you that have significant renewable energy portfolios. No doubt this is a big piece of news for you guys, and will affect your business plans going forward. Hopefully, you'll recognise that this isn't a gold standard only initiative, that there are likely changes coming from other standards in the same kind of space, but that in our case we've manoeuvred to be able to offer an alternative product in renewable energy labels. And I would definitely encourage all of you, if you are interested in that, to respond to the call Bernardo highlighted by the 15th of August, because that's really the opportunity to get some extra support from the GS Secretariat in completing your documentation. But in the meantime, thank you again all for joining. We really do appreciate your attention and consideration, and look forward to sharing with you further updates and a final version of the requirements. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.